In less than 24 hours, a 34-year-old East Side man is scheduled to be executed.
Christopher Young admits he was drunk and high when he went into a convenience store and robbed and murdered the owner 14 years ago. The
Night Team's Devin Clark went to Livingston recently and spoke to Young, who says though his time on earth may be running out, he hopes what he's done while on death row will live on through others forever.
You know, some of the things I was doing in the world, and I've been a gang member all my life. And so I'm like on a collision course for death out there and not caring. I think that if I would have never came to death row, I wouldn't be the individual I am today. I wouldn't be as mature. I wouldn't be able to explain to my daughter's life, like the appreciation of it, because I didn't have any appreciation for life. I wouldn't be able to explain to them that there's a world out there and not just a city, you know. I wouldn't be able to do any of that without death row.
The cold, sterile walls of Texas death row stand as a testament to what it means to be condemned. It's the night of July 16th, 2018, and Christopher Young knows that time has run out. Lying awake on his cot, the silence of his cell presses down on him like a weight too heavy to bear. Less than 24 hours remain until his execution. His thoughts, however, are not consumed by fear. Instead, he's left with a sense of helplessness, a nagging reflection on everything that has led him here. Christopher stares at the ceiling, replaying every mistake he's ever made. He's not the angry 21-year-old who took Hazmukh Patel's life. He's not the gang member, not the addict. Over the last decade, he has tried to become something different, something better. He's mentored other inmates, rejected violence, found religion, and achieved peace. But none of that matters now. The countdown has begun, and with each passing minute, his fate is sealed. Earlier that day, he had stood before the Texas Parole Board, not to beg for his life, but to challenge their judgment. He pointed to the bias in the system, racial injustice, and the fact that others with similar crimes had been granted clemency. He was not asking for sympathy. Instead, he asked for fairness. But the board had not listened. Now, in the stillness of his cell, surrounded by the heavy silence of death row, Christopher prepares to meet his fate. Not because he hasn't changed, but because change came too late. The victim, Hazmukh Patel, a man who came to America for a better life. To understand the tragedy of Christopher Young's story, we must first understand the life that was lost. Hazmukh Patel was 55 years old when he met his untimely end on November 21, 2004. A devoted husband, father, and immigrant, Hazmukh had moved to America in search of a better life. He dreamed of safety, stability, and the opportunity to provide for his family. His small convenience store, nestled in the east side of San Antonio, was more than just a business. It was a testament to his hard work and determination. Hazmukh wasn't just any shopkeeper. He was part of the fabric of his community, knowing his customers by name and offering them a sense of peace with his friendly demeanor. For years, he had served his customers with integrity, earning the respect of all who knew him. He believed in karma, in the quiet dignity of his work, and in building something lasting in this new country. That quiet morning on November 21st, Hazmukh had opened his store just like any other day. But that day, at 9:30 a.m., a stranger walked in, a young man named Christopher Young. Hazmukh's fate was sealed the moment their paths crossed. Christopher Young, the making of a monster. Christopher Young was just 21 years old when he entered Hazmukh Patel's store. His eyes bloodshot, his thoughts clouded by the effects of alcohol and drugs, Christopher wasn't a man of reason that morning. He had spent the weekend in a haze, alcohol, cocaine, and adrenaline coursing through his body, drowning out the pain and confusion that had consumed his life for years. But the truth was, Christopher wasn't really there to rob the store. He wasn't interested in money or material gain. He had no plan, no demands. He walked into that store because deep inside, he was lost. He wasn't a hardened criminal or a mastermind. He was a young man trying to survive in a world that had taught him to fight for everything, even if it meant hurting others. Christopher's past was filled with trauma. At the age of 8, he had lost his father to a senseless murder. That loss shattered everything he had known. His family, already on the edge, fell apart. There was no therapy, no support system to help him process the grief. The world around him continued to spiral, and he fell deeper into it. Without a father figure, Christopher sought comfort in the streets. The gang culture welcomed him with open arms, offering him a sense of belonging, a false promise of protection. The Bloods, a violent street gang, took him in, and by the age of 12, Christopher was entrenched in their world, fighting, dealing, and living a life defined by violence and survival. But what the world saw in Christopher was not just a gang member. He was more than the streets he walked. He was a young boy with extraordinary potential, a talent for music, a natural gift for chess, an intellect that teachers would later describe as brilliant. But none of that mattered. Not in the streets, not in the courtroom. The crime. One shot that changed everything. On November 21, 2004, Christopher walked into Hazmukh Patel's store with a gun tucked under his jacket. What followed was not a robbery. It was a senseless act born from years of rage, trauma, and poor choices. Hazmukh immediately recognized the tension in Christopher. With calm words, he raised his hands in surrender, attempting to de-escalate the situation. But there was no negotiating with Christopher's mind. In one swift movement, the gun was drawn. A shot rang out. Christopher didn't speak another word. He didn't try to take anything from the store. The damage was done. Hazmukh Patel fell, his life extinguished in a split second. Blood spread across the floor, but it was not just Hazmukh's life that was destroyed. It was Christopher's as well. The moment that shot echoed through the store, everything changed. In a daze, Christopher fled the scene, unsure of what he had just done. He wandered the streets, his mind overwhelmed by the magnitude of his actions. Soon after, the police apprehended him. He was found sitting on a curb, shaking, disoriented, and crying. The arrest, the confession, and the beginning of the end. By the time the police caught up with him, Christopher had already begun to understand the enormity of what had just happened. He confessed quickly. He didn't remember firing the gun, but he admitted to the crime. He told the detectives that he was drunk, lost, and deeply sorry. But it was too late. The video surveillance, witness testimonies, and his own confession sealed his fate. Christopher Young was charged with capital murder, and the state of Texas moved swiftly toward its punishment. The victim, Hazmukh Patel, had left behind a grieving family, and the community rallied for justice. But as the case unfolded, the story behind the crime, the story of a young man broken by trauma, addiction, and the streets, remained untold. The trial. The system and its verdict. The trial was quick. The facts were clear. Christopher had confessed. The footage showed him pulling the trigger, and the victim's family was devastated. But the trial didn't just focus on the crime. It focused on Christopher's past, on his gang affiliation, his criminal record, and his association with violence. He was painted as a thug, a menace to society, a young man with no hope of redemption. The defense, however, attempted to show another side of Christopher, one that the jury didn't see. They spoke of his intelligence, his potential, and his early promise as a musician and scholar. They told of a young boy whose father was murdered, whose life was shaped by a cycle of violence and neglect. They argued that Christopher had been a victim of his environment, that he had been failed by the system long before he ever picked up a gun. But the jury didn't see it that way. They saw a killer, and in Texas, killers die. Christopher Young was sentenced to death. Life on death row, the solitary struggle. Christopher's time on death row began in 2006 at the Polinsky Unit, one of the most notorious death row facilities in Texas. For him, this was not just a prison, it was a world of isolation. 23 hours a day in a tiny barren cell surrounded by nothing but silence and concrete. The brutality of the world outside was replaced by an equally brutal solitude inside. At first, Christopher fought back against the isolation. He shouted, he banged on the walls, and he tried to resist the overwhelming silence that pressed in on him. But over time, something began to change. It wasn't the prison system that broke him. It was the silence, the time, and the reflection it forced upon him. Then he met Reginald Blandon, a fellow inmate, who would change his life. Reginald was different from the other men Christopher had encountered. He wasn't hardened by the streets. He was calm, centered, and willing to teach Christopher something he had never known before: peace. Reginald introduced Christopher to books, philosophy, self-help, and works that challenged his view of the world. One book, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, hit him like a ton of bricks. It spoke of the power of thought, of how a person's mindset shapes their life. Reginald's lessons began to take root in Christopher's mind. He started to reflect on the trauma of his past, on the violence that had defined his life, and on the possibility of change. Christopher began mentoring younger inmates, speaking out against violence and helping guards de-escalate tense situations. He found peace, but it was too late. The system had already sentenced him to death. The final hours, redemption denied. In 2018, Christopher stood before the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles. He didn't beg, he didn't cry, he didn't try to play the victim. Instead, he challenged the board. He pointed out the racial biases in the system. He told them that others, white men, with similar or worse crimes, had been granted clemency. He spoke about his transformation, the man he had become behind bars. But the board didn't listen. They voted against clemency, and Christopher's death was set. On the evening of July 17, 2018, Christopher's fate was sealed. He was led to the Huntsville death chamber, his last moments spent reflecting on everything he had been and everything he had become. His last words were soft, almost a whisper. "I've changed, I'm sorry." The needle was injected. The drugs began to take effect. Within minutes, Christopher Young's chest stilled. Christopher Young's story is a tragic reflection of a broken system. A young man with potential, lost to trauma, addiction, and violence, only to find redemption when it was too late. His death is a reminder that the system doesn't always allow for growth or change. It punishes without looking at the possibility of rehabilitation, without considering the long-lasting effects of trauma. In the end, Christopher Young's story isn't just about his crime. It's about what we allow to happen when we fail to address the underlying causes of violence. It's about what happens when the system chooses punishment over redemption. Thank you for joining us today as we explored the life and death of Christopher Anthony Young. His story serves as a powerful reminder of the complexities of justice and the consequences of the systems we put in place. If you found this story compelling, please like, comment, and subscribe to The Final Hour. We'll continue to bring you deep dives into some of the most shocking and thought-provoking cases in true crime. Stay tuned for more.